All right, welcome. Um, let's get started. So nice to see everybody and to see the things that are bringing you joy, from cats and plants to a lot of food, a lot of family. And it sounds like we have a really amazing group from Maryland and Florida and Alaska and California and Hawaii. So really excited. One thing that's bringing me joy today is it's actually out of New York for the last week for the first time since pandemic began, and spent a week in Idaho, which is the most beautiful state I've ever been to. And it never occurred to me that that was true. I also did just get off an overnight flight. So if I slur any words or anything else, it's not anything nefarious. It's just that I'm quite tired from a very long journey, but really excited to be back here and with everybody. So today we'll talk about how to fundraise from older donors in 2020 and all the things that are changing. Before we get started, my colleague Simone is doing great work to make sure this is CFRE approved. So now all 13 webinars are approved. The recordings are on our resources page, and you just need to check a quick box in the survey to make sure that we're certifying your participation. Agenda for today: introductions, how 2020 has changed behavior of older donors. And so we'll look at three different, we'll talk about some successful fundraising strategies that other organizations have used to attract older donors who are both digitally savvy and not so much. We'll talk about QCDs, which are a huge revolution in the way older donors are giving, and then we'll talk through next steps and Q&A. So there's a lot to cover today, and feel free to pop in questions in the Q&A box, please, instead of the chat, and we'll be tracking those the whole time. All right, so many of you know this. We'll go quickly through intros. My name is Patrick, along with my co-founder Jenny. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill. We work alongside an amazing group of people, usually in New York City, now around the world, and we're almost at $1.5 billion in charitable giving. We should hit that in the next 2 days or so, which is really exciting. We've also asked you how your week is going. As usual, a couple of interesting trends here. People are, happiness has dipped a little bit, but so has anxiety. People are feeling a little bit less eager, but also sort of equally lonely. So nothing huge to report here, although it is noteworthy that that blue line, which is happiness, was sort of trending up for a while, and then June and July, things have gotten a little bit worse. So hopefully we can sort of stick together through this, because I'm feeling a little bit the same way, where for a while we were banding together, we were getting through this, and now it's not clear when we will be done getting through this, which is really tough. Also, we've asked what folks are worried about, and what you can see in this red line that's shooting up to the right is that people are actually much more worried about coworkers' health and safety and their own safety. And so as COVID-19 has spread to more hotspots, when we first started these conversations, New York City, where I am, was the epicenter of it. New York has really calmed down. The Sun Belt, the South, parts of the Mountain West have really picked up. And so we're thinking about you, and I imagine this is pretty disconcerting on top of things like how to do my job well, etc. All right, so let's talk through older donors and what's happening here in 2020, which is just different than every year in recent memory preceding this. So 3 main trends. The first to really pay attention to is that there's a rapid move to technology adoption among older generations. And even before COVID-19, I think a lot of fundraisers in particular had this mental image of grandma who doesn't know how to press pause on a VCR, but in fact, most older donors are relatively tech savvy. At the beginning of 2020, so before all the things that we know happened, 73% of Americans over 65 were regular internet users. And then since the spread of COVID, internet usage among all age groups, which is both time and penetration, meaning how many people are using it and for how much time in a day, has shot up pretty dramatically across the board. Part of this is that younger generations have put an enormous amount of time and effort in teaching tech to older folks, because this is the new way that they're communicating. So the Apple Store creates a lot of paid or free coaching on how to use tech, and you can think about that happening 100 times over from kids and grandkids, et cetera. So there's been a lot of hands-on training on how to use Zoom, how to use FaceTime, how to check email, how to send text messages, et cetera. What we hear in the tech world is that analysts are saying 2030 is happening in 2021. Expected adoption of folks, the expected adoption of tech by older folks, which was a sort of gradual shift, where we would have ended in 2030 with that gradual shift has actually shot up. And so that's happening in 2021. There was a question of how we're defining older. I think for this conversation, we're mostly thinking about 65 plus. Although as we get into QCDs, we'll think about 70 plus. But it's a fair point and a good one that people who are 67 are different than people that are 97, both generationally and ability-wise. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the nuances there as well. And then lastly, when we look at things like internet penetration, internet usage, tech adoption, most of the reporting that you'll see is on the broad population. But when you think about your donors, who tend to be a little bit more affluent, in some cases significantly more affluent, those people are going to be light years beyond the general population. And so this is a pretty key idea. When you start looking at some of this data, you can think of it as a minimum for your own donors in a world where your donors are middle class, upper middle class, and beyond. Second key trend here is that isolation is taking a real toll. So this actually surprised me when I found out the number, but almost 14 million Americans over the age of 65, so about 28% of the population, live by themselves. ARP and Kaiser Family Foundation suggested that 43% of all older adults either experience loneliness. Pre-isolation, you already have 43% of older adults experiencing loneliness. And of course, this lack of social connection and brain stimulation is associated with a whole host of negative health impacts. And so this is something that's taking a real toll on many people. And even though, we'll hear sometimes, what do you think about, are people getting bored of Zoom? Are they getting bored of in-person or sort of virtual connectivity? And I think the answer is maybe if you have a full-time job where that is the norm, but if not, many of these people have gone from spending 60% of their days with other people to spending 0 or 5% of their days with other people. And that is a huge shift and one of the most important things. Those of you that are planned giving experts and planned giving officers on the call, which is probably about half, will note that one key thing here is the folks who are living alone are actually much more likely to be great planned giving experts, or planned giving prospects, excuse me. So folks who don't have spouses and in some cases don't have kids are something like 8 times more likely to make a planned gift to a charity than someone with a spouse and a child. Excuse me. The third thing that is really important is to understand that wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated in older generations. And while we are talking about a worldwide recession, actually what that looks like varies greatly based on groups. So this is what unemployment looks like in May 2020. So of 16 to 19-year-olds, which are sort of part-time, mainly high school kids, 30%. But from 2024, it's almost 23% unemployment. Goes up to 13% and then trails off a bit. Now, this means that income is sharply down. Now, most folks who are retired don't have jobs, definitionally, by being retired. And so their income, quote unquote, is reliant on investments as opposed to day-to-day income. And there's been a huge disconnect in this recession compared to something like 2008 or 2001, where while unemployment is high, the stock market has continued to be in gangbusters. And even the snapshot from a couple days ago doesn't do justice to the rally that it had in the last few days. And so if you are relying on your IRA and 401k and your stock investments and other things, you're actually doing quite well right now compared to those in income. So this might not be the year you want to greatly expand your millennial fundraising. It's actually the year to really, really focus on older donors. And the third thing to note, so income is sort of not necessarily affecting older donors. Investments are going really well. And then most households, especially older folks, are spending considerably less. So this is what consumer spending looks like from April to May, and it may actually be going down again in July as there are more shutdowns around the country. So you have basically a steady level of income compared to, say, 2019, but actually much less spending. So that makes this the ideal moment for older donors, and why we're diving in today, because these are going to be such an important part of hitting your goals for the next 2-3 years. So we have some really cool data to share about what folks on this call and across the spectrum are already doing. So we asked people whether they expect to have in-person visits to donors in 2020. And what we saw is about 12%, which was sort of surprising to me actually, say they already are having these events or already doing in-person visits. 14% says we don't currently, but we expect to before the end of the year. Almost half say pretty unlikely, and 15% say definitely not, while 14% say I don't know. And I think in the absence of a vaccine, the definitely not and unlikely are probably the correct ones. It's very unlikely that in the absence of a lot more safety precautions, it's going to make sense for someone who is traveling around the country, like you all, or traveling to different people, to then go visit older donors. So we also asked how people have changed strategy vis-a-vis older donors. And you won't be surprised if I know that almost 80% are increasing phone calls, 43% are promoting more digital ways to give, half are hosting virtual events, a third are increasing their social media presence, which we'll talk about later. And this is actually a particularly savvy and insightful way to reach older donors that is commonly overlooked and based on a lot of misconceptions. And then 80% make no changes. When we ask people what the primary avenues they use to reach older donors, again, not surprising, 87% say phone calls, 84% say email, 80% say direct mail, 27% say social media, and then only 6% say video calls, which is interesting. When COVID started, people thought there might be a revolution in one-to-one conversations over video. And frankly, people don't seem that comfortable talking to strangers over video, or even people they know pretty well. And in many cases, it was a novelty for a little bit, and then people have gone back to phone calls. And the exception is with younger children, where you actually just need the full body language and to be able to communicate anything at all. We also asked what types of gifts people are soliciting from older donors. Almost all said cash or annuity or annual gifts. 55% say bequests. 40% say QCDs, which we're going to dive into a lot later in this conversation. 34% say stock, and 30% say donor advised fund. So some interesting stats there, but none of those will be particularly surprising. So let's actually, now that we know what the trends are and how other organizations are adapting, let's talk through some very specific tactical strategies for success with older donors. So first one is thinking about social media as an avenue to connect with older donors is actually a really key win. And I'm going to walk through what that looks like. So 33% of nonprofits are increasing social media outreach. 62% of online seniors are on Facebook. So forget about anything, forget about Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Don't worry about those at all if your strategy is focused on older donors. Those numbers are quite low for seniors and older folks. But American adults spend an average of 1 hour per day on Facebook in normal times, meaning people are just hanging out on Facebook for an hour looking for things to do, in part because they're bored, and in part because we really crave social connection that social networks provide. But look at this graph. So this isn't total time. This is additional time spent on social media platforms by users in the US during the coronavirus pandemic. So meaning on top of that 1 hour, 30% of people are spending an additional 1 to 2 hours, and 20% of people are spending an additional 2 to 3 hours, and 18% are spending an additional 3 hours. Now, this might seem jaw-dropping, but actually it's quite reasonable. In the absence of being able to see people, this is a great level of engagement or type of engagement for many. It may be a poor substitute for the real thing, but it really is the next best thing. It's significantly better than watching TV or other things in terms of driving social connectivity. And so what this means is that you have a relatively captive audience for many hours a day. And my sense, and I wasn't able to find data on this, is that folks who are more likely to be isolated and more likely to be cautious about venturing into lots of outdoor activities are going to be driving this increased social media use. And so this is your older, wealthier donors are on Facebook, spending a lot of time on that. And so now what might you do with that? Well, one thing we've seen from our partners and from our own work is that social media users are extremely willing to take surveys. So you can start putting up some surveys, and we have a template for you that's on our resources page that you can just rip and use. And not only does this let people show their preferences, you can see who's ready to help right now. You can see who's lonely and needs checking in on, per our second trend. So you can just give folks a call if they say they're really having a hard time. And that will definitely be something that is remembered for the next conversation that's a fundraising conversation. You'll also be able to service who has a donor advised fund or stocks or QCDs, and this will help craft your strategies going forward. One key thing is that A lot of people sort of wait for surveys to come in and then sort through the results, et cetera. But if you think of it as a one-on-one avenue to raise your hand, if you take a survey and you put your phone number in, and then a gift officer calls you 10 minutes later, that's an incredible opportunity, and say, wow, I just read your survey response. Sounds like these 3 things are really important to you. It also, you also suggested that you want to hear more about giving via stock. Let's have that conversation. And so you want to keep the survey results page open on your computer so you can actually just call folks as soon as they finish it, which is not something that most organizations do. But if I'm really excited and I type all this about why I love the land trust, then my half-life is pretty quick. But if you can call me immediately, that's a real opportunity to build the next level engagement and potentially get a very serious major gift. And as I mentioned, we've done some of the work and put a survey template on our resources page, which we can send out after this call. Okay, the other thing on social media that works really well is easy, authentic messages. So you can just use your iPhone or whatever you have, record a quick message, and getting people to know the people behind the organization makes it much more powerful when those people reach out. So it can be an executive director, a president. It can also be anyone doing interesting things. The English teacher, the tour guide, the park ranger, et cetera. Make sure you can have a wider range of voices, and people will really get to know and get to like some of them. Same thing here is that when people connect, when they comment, when they like it, you can shoot a Facebook message, or if you have their email address or phone number, you can just reach out quickly. And that tight timeline does wonders for just the value of that conversation. I think I learned from a sales professional that if someone types in some information in a form and you can call them within 5 minutes, you're like 3 times more likely to get a conversation than if you wait an hour. And so that instantaneousness is really valuable and actually becomes really impressive to the person on the other end of it. All right. But some of you wrote in our survey, and I'm sure you're thinking, okay, but not everybody's on social media. Some of my donors want nothing to do with technology. How do I reach them when I can never see them in person? So we've already talked through a lot of strategies around phone calls, et cetera, but I want to highlight a couple of new ideas that might be really useful. So most major donors, as I mentioned, are digitally savvy. So don't overly anchor to non-digital outreach just because you hear a couple of folks mention it. But a couple of key tactics here. One is there's actually a lot of interest in volunteering right now and not a lot of ways to do it. So you could give 20 postcards, 20 stamps, a list of names and addresses, and a draft message to a volunteer and have them write handwritten notes to major donors or to people that you hope to be major donors. And that will feel really resonant to that donor. So that's a great opportunity. And if they can do more than 20, you can drop off 100. It's a cheap, efficient way. And people are really hungry to volunteer, especially in ways that build social connection. Here's another thing I like. So there's something called mypostcard.com, and sort of like everything else we talk about here, there's no connection to FreeWill. I don't even know who runs this company, but I really use them all the time for my own thank you notes. And what it is it's a photo that you can upload off your phone or off your computer, and then on the back it's sort of a quasi handwritten note. So it doesn't look perfectly handwritten, but you type it in yourself. So you can think about doing maybe one of these every 5 or 6 minutes. It costs about $3 each. So if you have major donors and you have a photo of them from a recent gala, or you have a photo of your staff working hard, maybe with masks on, cleaning the land trust, or a new puppy that just got adopted, et cetera, you can then write a personal message on the back. And that message, of course, can be 80% the same to everybody and 20% different to the individual. And it's something that feels really great. Whenever I send these, people love getting them, and it's a really cool tactic. Also, for your parents, your kids, your aunts, your uncles, et cetera, these are really just incredibly well received because then they stay on the fridge forever. And the same will be true with your donors, so that they'll be able to tack it up and you'll have this ongoing reminder, as opposed to just like a very thoughtful thank you note, which will be read and really appreciated, but then goes away pretty quickly. And then one other thing, we've talked a lot about virtual events, and some people just aren't good at attending them, or don't want to, or don't feel comfortable. But for major donors, and you think about your top 50, 100, et cetera, depending on the size of your organization, who can't join, this is a great excuse for a phone call. So you can call up and say, Tom, I know you weren't able to make the virtual event we had, but I wanted to fill you in on how it went. do you have 20 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? And you can share notes from the speaker, an anecdote about the event, and also say, well, and our executive director shared some ways to give. Do you want to hear about those as well? So this is a great reason to have a phone call that I don't think enough people are utilizing. But if you're putting all this work into a virtual event and some of your top donors can't make it, this is a really great way to engage them and either help them join the next one or just actually have a great conversation about how they want to give. Okay, so tactic 3 is going to be on thoughtful planned giving. And what this graph is the number of bequests by month at FreeWill. And so you can see sort of normal times, excuse me, and then March and April shoot up as COVID happens and people are getting their heads around it. And then May comes and things sort of settle down a little bit as the news gets old. And then June and July, and this purple line is the extrapolation of July based on all the days that have gone by in July. So July is only, I guess, 14 days in right now. And so what we're looking at is potentially higher than March, a little bit lower than April, but still off the charts compared to, say, July last year. So this might be 4 times higher than July of last year. So planned giving is off the charts. Older donors, there is some landmines that you might walk into. So we're going to be really careful here. We're going to talk about how to do this thoughtfully in a way that ends up being very well received by donors. So we know that seniors are thinking about estate planning more than ever, based on some of the stats I just showed you. But we also don't want to be offensive. It's very scary to live in a world where your mortality is much more in your face than it has been really at any point in recent history. So there's 2 key strategies, and just remember these constantly in all of your planned giving work, and you should be fine. So strategy 1 is giving multiple options as ways to give. And so instead of saying, hey, you should make a planned gift, you say, look, there are 3 ways that a lot of people do this. Thing 1, thing 2, and planned giving. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The second thing, and this is really, really important, is highlighting the breadth of ages making planned gifts. And what you don't want seniors to do is feel targeted by being old. But if you can show them, hey, this 40-year-old just made a planned gift, would you like to also do this? This is something that people of all ages do. That really softens it as opposed to saying, would you like to do this? Because people feel like even if that went to your whole email list, it might have just gone to me as an older person. So we've shared this in the past, but I just wanted to bring this up again. This is an email we call the triple option. And our partners at the Fairness Project sent it out. So there was some more context above this and some more context below, but I wanted to really zero in on this and say, we want to help you figure out the best way to give. Here's 3 options: cash gift, Amazon Smile, join the many people who have included us in their legal will. So now you're just in this mindset of having multiple options as opposed to the immediate aversion that people feel around their own mortality around planned giving. And in our work, in our experiments, we've seen that actually offering 2 or 3 options can be significantly more effective than offering just 1 option. And the important caveat here is jamming this as a bullet 10 in a newsletter is not a good strategy. But if you say, look, most people want to help, here are 3 ways to help, pick which one works for you, that is, and it's focused on giving, that's a really big opportunity. Other thing is that this is about a year old now, we tested a bunch of Facebook ads. And the most effective messaging we tested was even if you plan to live to 150, you still need a will. Get started today. And so what this does is it says, look, no one thinks they're going to die. You're not going to die. But even if you're going to be immortal, you still need a will. And that idea actually sort of like calls out the main fear in a way that's a little bit humorous and makes it much easier for people to accept it. The other language that's really effective with older donors is this. So supporters of our Humane Society, or insert your organization here, from 18 to 88, choose to include us in their will or trust. Would you like information on how to join them? And what this specifically calls out is there's a very broad range of people who do this. We are not picking on you because you are older. Instead, we're welcoming you into something that is widely done. And this is really effective and basically erases any option of, or any possibility of blowback here. So we'll send the slides around after. You'll have all this language, and feel free to start working into your conversations and some of your outreach. Yes, the point here is that these emails are ready for you. All right, point 4, and we're going to dive deeper into this. So going big on QCDs will be one of the defining strategies for successful fundraising from seniors for the next 10 years. And so just as a reminder, QCDs, also known as IRA charitable rollovers, also known as qualified charitable distributions, are the fastest growing type of philanthropy over the last 2 years. And for many seniors, this will be the single best way to give. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes diving deep on QCDs before we get into questions. So just as a reminder, QCDs, for those of you that are uninitiated, qualified charitable distributions are a gift coming directly out of an IRA to a charity. Doesn't ever hit the donor's bank account, it goes straight to it. These QCDs have grown about 3x since 2017. The 2 reasons for that are, 1, the aging of America. So there are more people over 70 than there have ever been in our history. And 2, there are tax changes, which means very few people are itemizing deductions. So in 2017, about 30% of Americans itemized deductions. In 2019, about 9% did. So 91% of adults do not itemize their deductions, which means charitable giving has no tax benefit. QCDs, on the other hand, always have a tax benefit. Now, a twist here is that when coronavirus hit, the CARES Act eliminated RMDs, which is the money people must take out of their IRA for 2020. So you might think, well, why do this at all this year? But actually, there's still an excellent option, and I'll talk about why. Before we do, just to prove the point that there's still an excellent option, we asked people whether they've gone up or down in 2020, even with this change. And so 30% of folks said they stayed the same, 16% said they increased, a very small percentage said they decreased, and half of the folks didn't have the numbers on hand when they were filling out the survey. So what that actually means is, roughly of the people that know, 1/3 saw them increased, and about 2/3 saw them stay the same. So really strong giving in QCDs, even without the required minimum distribution. Here's why they work. So money in an IRA is what we call pre-tax, and will always be taxed even if the donor passes away. So there's no way to get money out of an IRA without paying income tax. And if they pass away, you're paying a very steep income tax because most of that money is coming in just a few years in small chunks. So you're in a pretty high tax bracket pretty early. On this now in your bank account is much more valuable to the donor and should be conserved. So what this looks like is, and follow me here, if a donor takes a distribution from her IRA of $100, pays $30 in taxes, and then donates $70, she might net a deduction of about $21. And the charity here gets $70. But if the donor sends it right out of her IRA, the donor sends $100 to her favorite charity. So suddenly we're at almost 50% more money. She saves $30 in taxes, so about 50% more savings, and is making a much bigger impact. So even in a world with or without RMDs, this is still a better way to give. Now, one of the challenges is that no one really gets it yet. And we're working on that and working with our partners as much as possible to get them up to speed. So we asked folks, do you know how the CARES Act affects gifts? And about 40% said yes, 23% said no, and 36% said somewhat. And usually in these types of questions, somewhat really means no. Otherwise, they would have said yes. We also asked, how well do you think donors understand QCDs? And that very small yellow sliver is very well. So about 18% said not at all, 43% said somewhat, 36% said I'm not sure. And so most people are pretty confused, even though this is the best way to give. And our role as fundraisers is to help clarify this path. So the other reason to do this is that building the habit of QCDs is hugely helpful because they can become a recurring annual gift. And once you get people into this practice, they tend to do it year after year. We'll show some stats on that in a moment. The other thing to know here, and this is research by Dr. Russell James that we talk about sometimes, is that when people give out of stocks or QCDs or even donor advised funds, they are much better for you as an organization than getting cash gifts. Because the same donor who is making a cash gift will give a significantly larger QCD gift, even given exactly the same person. And that's because giving out of wealth is much easier to give a large amount mentally than to give out of income. So as much as possible, when you can steer people towards QCDs and stocks, do that as much as you can, and you'll get significantly larger gifts from the same people. We've talked about this in a previous webinar, so I haven't included it here. But if you're doing virtual events or galas that cost money, you can actually have people pay with stocks or QCDs because there's no benefit in a virtual gala. And this will help people get used to that process, and you can go back next year and ask them to make a gift from the same avenue. All right, so how to make the most of QCDs in 2020. When we asked nonprofits, about 76% were increasing their marketing, which is really, really key. Everyone who's over 70 should know about this. Most folks in your donor base will have some form of IRA. So it's very, very common among this population. This is what it looks like, and I'll zoom in a moment, for a great organization called Second Harvest of Silicon Valley. Now, they have a donor population that mirrors probably a lot of yours. A decent number of people under 70, but also a lot of folks under 70. So if you see at the bottom there, it says, P.S. if you're 70 and a half or older, you can join fellow Second Harvest of Silicon Valley supporters who make tax-free gifts from their IRAs each year. This is what it looks like in larger font. Learn how you can save money while ensuring everyone has access to a healthy meal. So it's both happy, but still mission focused. And this language in just a standalone donation ask is a really good one. And so this is just an email that goes out to everybody. They likely don't have age data based on this context, but it's a really interesting way. And most people have a pretty significant portion of donors who are over 70. So I wouldn't be worried that a 36-year-old will see this and say, that's not for me. The structure of the PS really makes it an add-on, and the core message is available for everybody. The other thing they do prominently on their website is they have a big feature on qualified charitable distributions, and they've got a tool that helps folks do it. Also, it's right next to legacy giving. And so people that are exploring ways to give, it's very big, it's very prominent. Even better is if this is just on your checkout page. So that anyone who's over 70 going through your checkout page can give through QCDs instead. The other big thing to remember here is based on the earlier data that we shared, donors are much more confused than you think. We've talked to lawyers, accountants, literal rocket scientists who just don't know what QCDs are, even though it's inherently better for them. And so what you want to do is understand the key paths for the main custodians, the Medallions, the Schwabs, the Vanguards, et cetera, and be able to walk them through it. Because the average time to find the right form for a donor is almost 25 minutes. The banks haven't done a good job at making this easy, and that is a really big problem. You also want to run trainings for major gift officers on QCDs and common questions. When we talk to major gift officers, they're also more confused than you think. So if you run a development team, this is a really good opportunity. And then what Second Harvest of Silicon Valley did, which is we work with them, and so this is a little bit of a shout out to FreeWill, but you can do something similar if you don't want to partner with us, is that they built a tool that integrates all of the forms from the top banks. And if you don't want to partner with FreeWill, which is totally understandable, you can actually try to go track those down and figure out how to make them available as well. There are some extra bells and whistles here, but if you want to do a quick and dirty, there are some avenues there as well. And you want to do the research to make sure you know how someone with Fidelity or a T. Rowe Price, et cetera, IRA will do it. Because it, unlike a will, which is sort of standard in state by state at least, in this case, the forms are different and the practices are different by each account holder. All right, so some advanced tactics on QCDs. One thing we've noticed over time is that many people take QCDs or make them at the same time every year. So if you got one last June, you want to follow up in mid-May or mid-April and say, hey, you did this last year, would you like to do it again? And because people are in that habit with their finances, it's a really good opportunity. You also want to ask QCD donors if they would like to learn more about making your organization a beneficiary of their IRA. Once we've started looking at the IRA as a potential philanthropic vehicle, it actually has some tremendous benefits. Right? If you can bequeath cash or even a house to your heirs, but then give an IRA away to charity, that is a very sophisticated and very powerful way to do it, because your heirs will pay considerable income tax on the IRA, even if you're not above the estate tax threshold, which many people don't realize. And then lastly, most donors don't know that they can make recurring gifts through QCDs, but it's actually easy to do so. On many, but not all, so you have to know which ones are there. On many custodians, it's just a single checkbox to say, make this an annual or even a monthly gift. And so that creates a steady flow of cash for you and less work for the donor. And I call this out because we actually see a lot of repetition among QCD donors. So in our research, 91% of gifts came from previous donors, but 58% came from previous QCD donors. So once you can get people in the habit, you'll be able to start expecting a gift potentially every year from the same account, which is really makes your life and your work a lot easier. Okay, the last sort of wrench in all of this that COVID throws is that many custodians for larger QCDs and also for stock gifts require what are called medallion signatures, which are sort of next level up from notaries. Oftentimes they're out of bank, not that many people can do them. They're generally a pain even in normal times. The problem is that many donors are unable or unwilling to visit a bank in person to go inside to receive a medallion signature. So now you're stuck. And we worked with a partner who had a donor who wanted to make a $100,000 gift, but medallion signatures were sort of off the table. And so that meant the charity was missing out on 100 grand because this person wasn't able to go figure out how to make a medallion signature. As I mentioned, they're often required, but our idea, and we worked with a partner, said, well, what if we just ask nicely? And we found that many banks right now will waive the requirement with a simple email. And so what that email looks like is, dear Chase Bank or whatever it might be, I would like to make a qualified charitable distribution from my IRA to X for X, but because of the current pandemic, I'm not able to obtain a medallion signature, and I'm wondering if you can waive the requirement. Please let me know if there's any information I can provide, or if we can discuss further on the phone. And this email has worked every time it's been tried. So it's a really interesting avenue. We figured just ask and be kind and see what happens. And it's made life a lot better for the donors and for the charities. So hundreds of thousands of dollars have been transferred because of this very, very short email. But it's a reminder on the power of kindness. Okay, so that's all we have on QCDs and strategies, a couple of resources, all of the sort of thoughtful plan giving emails, a bunch of the work on QCDs, et cetera, will be on our resources page, as well as some case studies of organizations that are doing QCDs particularly well. So feel free to check that out as well. If you're interested, in 2 days, I believe, on July 16th, on Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern, we'll do a full walkthrough of different planned and major giving tools for folks and case studies in case people are interested. Feel free to just RSVP in the survey. That will also include a bunch on QCDs. So feel free to note that as well. And then in next steps, one of my colleagues, Simone, who's wonderful, is going to drop a survey in the chat right now. We would love if you filled it out. If you want CFRE credit, you should definitely fill it out. But it also just helps us figure out what to do better next time. And then if you have any creative ideas to share, or if you need anything, just shoot me an email. And with that, we will move on to questions. Which I am pulling up on my phone, so I'm not texting other people. Laura asks, do you think it would be creepy to get a call right after you fill out a survey from the donor's perspective? Yes, if you don't do it well, but no if you do it well. And so just to role play this quickly, Laura, if you fill out the survey and you get a call and you say, hi, it's Patrick with the Land Trust, you know, we get notified when the survey gets filled out, and I just saw yours come through. And first of all, thank you for doing it. Second of all, it sounds like the role of providing outdoor space in an urban environment is really important to you, and it's really important to me. So thanks for sharing that. Also, I heard you mentioned that you wanted more information on this, and we try to be as helpful as possible. So do you have 10 minutes to talk about more information on how to give from a donor advised fund? So definitely you might want to role play it once or twice to get it right, but it's incredibly valuable, and you might screw it up once or twice because it's new, but you can do it well, and it can be done very well. Nancy says the stock market is likely to crash. That uncertainty does seem to affect affluent donors who are benefiting now from a strong market, but it will not last. What's the best way to deal with this concern by donors? Well, first, I mean, nobody knows anything about where the stock market is going to go. Otherwise, that person would be fabulously wealthy. But there's actually a bunch of, on our resources page, we talked through this maybe 2 months ago. And you can say things like, even in a volatile market, this donation can help. And you can actually make gifts, especially when the market is up, which it is right now, that don't change your portfolio. And so, won't go into this too much, but basically, if you give, let's say I have Google and Google's risen considerably. If I donate Google to the Red Cross, I can then immediately buy back Google, and I've wiped out all my capital gains. And so what you want to do in these conversations is say, even in a fluctuating market, giving stock can still be really powerful because it will wipe out your gains without changing your portfolio. And so it's a really savvy way that many donors do. And I think especially investors are somewhat susceptible to groupthink in a good way. And as long as you share that other people do this, you'll be really successful. Nicole asks, are QCD benefits only relevant with traditional IRAs and not Roths? That is correct. So Roth IRAs have already been taxed. And so you can still donate out of a Roth IRA, but it doesn't have the same pre-tax benefit that traditional IRAs do. And frankly, it's not worth it to give out of a Roth IRA instead of cash. Asks, might FreeWill already have a sample thank you note to send to a QCD donor to express that we recognize how special they are? We don't have one yet, but it's a great idea. And so that may be something that we work in the future. Maureen says, can stocks, QCDs, and donor advised funds be contributed to special events? The answer is yes, in some cases. And what I mean by that is that because these are tax-free gifts, you cannot receive a special benefit for it. So my alma mater is Georgetown. At one point, Georgetown had a great basketball team, and sometimes you could donate and get tickets. Now, I could not donate out of a donor advised fund and get tickets because those are of value. They're of less value these days, but that's a different story. Now, with virtual events, you can do this. So if you have special events, QCDs, DAFs, stocks, there's no meaningful transfer of value to the donor there, and so they're free to do it this way. And it's actually a great way to start building the list of people who are giving this direction. Sarah asks, how do you recommend combining annual and planned giving communication, especially as we are trying to streamline communications to cut through the election noise? So as we talked about a few weeks ago, the election will get hot and heavy, probably starting in August. Really, once the conventions happen, things sort of just go through the roof, and there's reason to believe that this year might be even more off the rails than a normal year. One thing you can do is go back to that triple option again. So people are really considering what to do, and you can put in your standard cash donation asks. And actually giving those multiple options will make people choose the one and often increases annual giving as well. So I wouldn't be too afraid of that. The other thing is that in many cases, you can add things like a checkbox that says, I would like to learn more about joining the Legacy Society on your standard cash checkout page. So that at people's moment of peak interest and peak excitement, they have more things to do. A lot of times, a big mistake people make in annual giving, which is sort of outside the scope of this conversation, is that you make a donation and then it just says a big thank you page, and that's it. And I just got really excited about this organization. I chipped in, and then there's no other avenue to engage, which is a mistake. There's a question of how do you make a monthly donation out of an QCD? So on the forms for Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard, there's usually a box to say make this a recurring, and then the options are annual or monthly. So Schwab will then deduct the gift and send it over to the Red Cross or whomever repeatedly. So it's a really good avenue. What is a medallion signature? So if you know what a notary signature is, it's something that bears a higher burden of proof than just me signing something. What it does is the notary has taken your license and said, yes, this person has signed this. Medallions are sort of a next level version of that. You need to be even more qualified to be a medallion overseer. I actually don't know what the noun is compared to a notary. And so it holds a lot of, usually they're at a bank, and it's to avoid fraud in very large transactions. So for a $500,000 stock sale, or if I'm sending it, I don't have $500,000 in stock, but if I did, and I was sending it to a sibling or whoever, that would require a medallion signature to avoid fraud for someone just stealing my money. Are there any clever ways to get more of your donors to like your pages on Facebook so that they might see the content that you put up? Yes. So you can do things like send a piece of Facebook content in an email that says, "We just done this. We love it if you liked and shared it, so it gets more news." The other thing you can do is you can advertise to fans of your page and similar for relatively cheap. For $20 or so, you'll really boost the reach of the posts on Facebook and generate a lot more people who are going to like and see it overall. How do you thank donors who may never walk into your organization to see a donor wall? I think this is actually a really cool thing. You can, if you think about the postcard idea, if they're on the donor wall, make sure you send it. Make sure the staff is sort of smiling and pointing to it, and that they have a way to see it actually tangibly, even if they don't walk in. Especially things like, healthcare places. And one of my favorite donor walls in the world is at the Seattle Children's Hospital, which just has an infinite line of people in their legacy society, so much so that you walk by it and you think, I have to be on this. I have to participate, even though I don't really know anyone in Washington State and I don't have children. It's so strong. But now you can imagine we're not running guided tours through the Children's Hospital the way we would have a year ago. And so making sure you're sending photos of people sort of saying thank you and pointing to it will be really helpful. All right. Great. So last question is for Facebook interactions with supporters. Do you recommend using the organization page or personal professional pages versus a personal page? Meaning, do I use my page? Do I use the FreeWill page? Do I use some sort of secondary professional Patrick page that doesn't have all my high school and college friends on it? I would suggest using the organization's page because there's obviously relatively high turnover in a lot of fundraising teams, and losing all that information because it's on Sarah's private page is probably not a good thing. But you do want to introduce yourself as opposed to saying, this is the land trust speaking. You say, hi, this is Sarah over at the land trust. And I just saw you fill this out. Anyway, I live nearby here, would love to sort of chat briefly. And being a human in that context is really helpful. All right, so that is all the questions we have. I hope this was really useful to you. If it was, or if it wasn't, let us know in the survey. And we will be back in, I believe, 2 weeks. And so thank you again for making the time today. I know that the world is getting increasingly crazy when we had sort of expected it to get a little bit more normal by now. And there's so much perseverance happening across your organizations that it's sort of inspiring to us, but also I think the world just owes you all a debt of gratitude for the work that you're doing in difficult times. So please come back in 2 weeks, but also hopefully you are kind to yourselves and have a really great 2 weeks in between them. So thank you again, and talk to you all soon.